All right, Steeler fans, it's Monday, which means it's time for the Monday morning conversation right here on the Let's Ride podcast. I'm excited to have this individual on. I almost said young man, but I would sound like I'm an ancient and archaic old man, which I guess I kind of am now. But nonetheless, in my 40s, this is Aaron Becker, who actually covers the Steelers now as part of YardBarker. But he has an interesting story. But let's first welcome Aaron to the show. Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Beautiful day here in Pittsburgh, right?
Absolutely. It's been good weather here where I live in the Mid-Atlantic, and so it's good to have you on the show. Now, you when I found you because you were posting a lot of clips from OTAs phase 3 and then obviously mandatory minicamp, and I looked at your bio and I was like, wow, this guy used to be with the Steelers in the communications department and like a reporter, but then he went to Kansas City. Walk us through your story and your journey up until where you're now a credentialed reporter in the locker room for YardBarker.
Yeah, so I received my BA in broadcast reporting from Point Park University right here in downtown Pittsburgh. And uh, during my senior year, I think it was there, I began working for the Steelers part-time in their communications department. And I also had the opportunity to do some reporting for them, their high school football showcase games of the week. They'd send me and a couple players out into the community and just talk football and interact with the fans. And after my 2 years with the Steelers, I went out to Kansas City and had some fun out there for a year. Unfortunately, it wasn't one of the Super Bowl winning years. It was the year that the Chiefs lost to Joe Burrow and company in the AFC Championship game. But that was an awesome experience, another really great historic franchise. And came back here after that year and been covering NFL news and a little bit of focus on the Steelers, obviously being based here in Pittsburgh the past 2 years.
So I do have to ask you, my first question, and I had this in my head since the moment I saw your bio was, even though you only spent a year in Kansas City, it's still a year in that organization and you're around those people. And obviously, I'm not suggesting that you have some intricate knowledge of Patrick Mahomes or Andy Reid's. Just from an organizational standpoint, what's the comparison like between Pittsburgh, Kansas City? Kansas City is like the best team right now, obviously, coming off of a Super Bowl victory. Pittsburgh is one of those storied franchises that's been there, done that, 6 Lombardi trophies. How would you compare them?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're very similar. They're two historic franchises. I mean, both organizations expect winning seasons, right? Obviously, you have Patrick Mahomes and company in Kansas City, and so they feel like they're in the Super Bowl every single year right now.
Yep.
But I mean, with the Steelers, I mean, they're always in contention for the playoffs. There's an expectation around both cities that by the end of the regular season, you are in the playoffs or have a shot at them, and you hope to make some noise. Now, obviously, the Steelers haven't been able to do that as of late here, but General Manager Omar Khan and company have been very active the last 2 years, and I think they're hoping to change that this year.
So I have one more question about the comparisons. It has nothing to do with the team, nothing
Yeah.
to do with the organization. It's everything to do with the fan base. I have said that the Steelers fan base is both spoiled and fickle, and maybe some of the most spoiled fans and fickle fans in all of fandom. But then again, I'm not really dialed into all the other fan bases in the NFL. You experience both of these fan bases. What's the comparison there? Because Steeler fans will always say, oh my gosh, like Steelers Twitter is the worst. Did you experience anything similar to that in Kansas City?
Yeah, I mean, guess it depends how you define the word spoiled. I mean, if you consider 3 Super Bowls in the last 5 years spoiled, yeah, I mean, that would be the Kansas City Chiefs fans for sure. But listen, both fan bases live and breathe football. They're the talk of the town. Besides, I mean, Kansas City is known for its barbecue and things like
Yeah.
that, but it is the Chiefs, man. That's what people live and breathe out there. And you come to Pittsburgh and it's the same thing. I mean, you have obviously the Pens and Pirates and whatnot, but people love the Steelers. People love the Chiefs. They're two historic franchises that have had a lot of success over the last 50 plus years. And there's definitely a lot of similarities there for sure.
All right, so let's talk about the Steelers and let's talk about this 2024 team. You're in the locker room, you're credentialed, you're talking to players. Really, just what's been the vibe around the team in the early stage? You were talking phase 3 of organized team activities, mandatory minicamp just wraps up. Here, this is your first year being credentialed and you're in the locker room. So this is all fresh to you. You don't really have anything to lean and look back on and to compare. But what's the vibe you're picking up on from the locker room?
Yeah, I mean, just talking with players who have been here in previous seasons. I might not have been in the locker room last year, but talking with some players, there's definitely an excitement level early here. I believe it was Dante Jackson, one of the Steelers' new cornerback, and he was just saying that there's an intensity level that he can feel that's different from his time in Carolina. There's this team, they have a lot of new pieces and not a lot of new faces. And I think there is that excitement level. I mean, you add two quarterbacks in the room and Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, and there's a lot of unknown there, right? But I think both players bring an excitement level of what they could be, and whether it's turning their career around for Russell Wilson or Justin Fields building upon what he's already done in the league.
Let's talk with the quarterbacks in particular. I'm sure you've been a part of the media scrums around those players. With Russell Wilson, you're talking about two players that are at completely different ends of the spectrum of their career. Justin Fields still really young, both from an age perspective and a years of experience perspective. Russell Wilson been to two Super Bowls, probably should have won two, but only won one. Nonetheless, like, how do you compare those two players from this stage of the preparation heading into 2024?
Yeah, so we talked to Arthur Smith this past week, and I think the big debate all offseason has been, is this going to be a real competition, right? You bring in Russell Wilson, he brings out a ton of experience, championship caliber play, leadership that room has really kind of lacked since the departure of Ben Roethlisberger. And so when they say he has pole position, I think they truly mean that. I think it's his job to lose, if you will, but you don't go and trade for a guy of Justin Fields' upside and let him ride the bench all year. I don't know what capacity both of these players will see the field this year, but I think both will see the field. I mean, whether that's Fields having specific packages for him or if he ultimately wins the job. If I had to make a prediction right now, I would be shocked if it wasn't Russell Wilson out there week one. But, Arthur Smith said he expects things to heat up with that competition when the team goes out to Latrobe here at the end of July. And, he said that both players knew what to expect, however they were acquired. And so I think fans who think it's, Russell Wilson, only Russell Wilson, I think you need to change your expectations. Justin Fields has had nice practices, so has Russ. But once those pads come on in Latrobe, I think anything is possible for sure.
Now, I know that you can't touch on specifics that you saw at mandatory minicamp. You can report on what players might say happened. For instance, X player caught a touchdown. Yes, he did. Now you can report about it. But mandatory minicamp, when you're watching some of these workouts, there are some times where players will flash. And some of those players that you could say to a fan base, these might be some players to watch. Let's start on offense. Who might be some of those players that, from what you've gleaned over phase 3 of OTAs and mandatory minicamp, you might say to the fan base, keep your eye out for this guy because he might be a big time player in this offense?
Yeah, so I always preface this conversation with don't let your eyes fool you this time of year, right? Because the
Right. That's
paths
true.
aren't on.
Yeah.
But a guy that has really popped out on offense is third-year wide receiver Calvin Austin.
Okay.
He's been very, very consistent through the first 4 weeks here, getting open, making catches. There were a few practices there that the Steelers receivers had some dropping issues, but Calvin Austin really wasn't among those. I know he's hoping to take a big step. He didn't even play his rookie year because of injury, and then last year, I don't know if the Steelers really knew how to use him or what his exact role was. I mean, outside of a 72-yard touchdown in Las Vegas in Sunday Night Football in Week 3, but I think they definitely want to grow his role. He could be a gadget guy. He's used a lot of his reps out of the slot, but he's certainly a guy that's caught my attention on offense through the first 4 weeks here.
Let's do the same question on the defensive side of the ball. I know defense is, you're in shorts. You said beware because obviously, I mean, they're not hitting anyone. They're not
Right.
blitzing. This is so now you're kind of you can't really talk about the Keanu Bentons because well, he's not doing
Right.
anything physical in the trenches. So you're typically glean on the defensive backs, but nonetheless on defense,
Right.
who would you say would be a player to watch for?
Yeah. I mean, Joey Porter Jr. has been excellent so far. In coverage, whether it's going up against George Pickens, who I think is the bona fide number one receiver, or
Absolutely.
even guys like Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, some of the newer guys and faces. He's looked really dominant. He put on a few pounds too, and I think he's really expecting to maybe establish himself as a top 5 corner in the league. I know the Steelers are obviously hoping that's the case, but he's looked really good, and he's come out on the winning end on a lot of battles so far here in OTAs and minicamp.
Well, I want to ask your opinion and pick your brain on some of the new players the Steelers have now had in the mix, and some of those on the defensive side. Deshaun Elliott is a player that really is he piques my interest. I'll put it that way because he is a piece of the puzzle that is, number one, a vast improvement over Keanu Neal a year ago. He's more versatile, but can do the same thing and should allow Minkah Fitzpatrick to do the robber role, as Terrell Austin put it this past week when he spoke to media. What have you seen from Deshaun Elliott? And that includes if you've ever interviewed him or spoken to him in the locker room.
Yeah, I mean, I think he might even be a little bit of an upgrade over what the Steelers had with Terrell Edmunds. I know they've been kind of looking to replace Edmunds over the last couple of years. And I mean, that room faced a lot of injuries last year, right? I mean, they were on practice squad guys for a few weeks there. But yeah, like you said, I mean, he's looked solid. He's not going to be a world beater or anything like that. He's not an all pro or anything like that. But I don't think the Steelers need him to be that, right? I mean, like you said, the Steelers' goal is to let Minkah Fitzpatrick play over the middle of the defense where he was an all-pro in 2022 and just play that instinctual type football. Deshaun Elliott's a really smart player, and I think he's going to help Minkah Fitzpatrick return to that all-pro caliber play for sure.
Our next player, and this has been a topic of discussion amongst the fan base because of a dot on the helmet. That would be none other than Patrick Queen of – he didn't wear the dot in Baltimore. If he did, it was very short-lived based on who they had in personnel and whether Roquan Smith was healthy or maybe he missed a game or two. What have you seen from Roquan Smith? Good leadership skills, stuff like that you could maybe glean from these workouts?
Yeah, I mean, Patrick Queen has absolutely taken over that inside linebacker room already. He brings an energy and an aura. He has certainly taken over that linebacker room. He's learning the defense just like some of the other newer guys. But I mean, young guys like Peyton Wilson. I just talked to Peyton Wilson this past Thursday, and he said he's been picking his brain early and often. Patrick Queen is certainly going to take over that room. I think the big question is, around him coming from Baltimore is, can he do it? Can he be the guy not playing next to Roquan Smith? But I mean, he gets to play next to another vet in Landon Roberts too. And, those two are going to be the guys. I think Peyton Wilson will potentially carve out a role for himself as maybe the dime linebacker. But I expect big things with Patrick Queen. I think the Steelers do too. And I think he brings an athleticism to that position that the Steelers really haven't had since Ryan Shazier. Now, Ryan Shazier and Patrick Queen are a little bit different archetypes, if you will. But Patrick Queen is certainly going to let the Steelers defense be able to do things and cover in space that they haven't been able to the last couple of years.
That's really insightful stuff. I want to ask you one more player about a defensive player. You mentioned him already once, Dante Jackson. I feel like the Steelers, you make the trade to trade Deontay Johnson to Carolina. And so immediately you're feeling like, okay, we want this player in return because there's really a pick swap otherwise. Dante Jackson, there's going to be some pressure there for him to perform. Not many people knew a lot about him. He spent his entire career in Carolina, which is not really a hotbed for NFL success right now. What have you seen from him as it pertains to being that number two, potentially opposite Joey Porter Jr. that the Steelers desperately need? Let's not forget that. What have you seen from Jackson?
Yeah, he's looked good. I think the Steelers are really high on him, right? I mean, you trade away a guy like Deontay Johnson, and you hope that whoever you get back is a significant contributor, right? I mean, it's a different side of the ball, but I was talking with Dante a couple weeks ago, and he said when he was talking with the Steelers after the trade, he said that they said for him to come in and just keep doing what he was doing in Carolina. He played on both sides. He followed certain receivers, and I think the Steelers believe Joey Porter Jr. can follow the opposing team's number one receiver, and Dante Jackson will follow the number two. Like you said, I think he is an upgrade over what the Steelers had the last couple of years. And yeah, I mean, you have younger guys like Corey Trice and Darius Rush who have looked good as well. I mean, Trice is coming off an injury, but yeah, I think that is Dante Jackson's job to lose for sure.
What about Cam Sutton? I mean, he obviously just joins the team, veteran minimum contract, 1-year deal. We all know about the off-field issues. Right. How did he get acclimated back into the system? He was only gone a year, but it's amazing. Right. And we rewrote this article at SteelCurtainNetwork.com. Dave Schofield did about how he was only gone a year, but he returns to a defensive back room that is completely new than when he was here last. How has he reacclimated to the Steelers?
Yeah, pretty well. I mean, I think the first day or two he was there, he was running with the second team defense. But this past week he's been with the ones. I mean, obviously he has a ton of experience in this defense. He's He's worked with the Steelers, what was it, 5 or so years there, and was only gone 1 year. Now, in Detroit, he had some struggles, but they used him on the outside, and I think coming back to Pittsburgh, his role will be in the slot. Now, I think the big question around him will be, will he be suspended? I think the Steelers genuinely don't know how that's gonna work itself out, but they have younger guys like Beanie Bishop and Nate Metters and Josiah Scott who have been working and mixing around in different roles. But Cam Sutton's he's looked solid. I mean, he's had most of his success out of the slot, and I think the Steelers think he can continue that success with his reunion here in Pittsburgh.
I would be stunned if he's not suspended. I was just
Yeah,
just because of what's out there. The NFL is so big on how they're viewed and the shield and protecting it and the what they stand for. I don't know how long the suspension will be and if an appeal
right.
process happens, but still, I want to ask you also about the rookies because everyone loves the new shiny toys, right? It's Christmas Day comes, you get those toys, and those are your favorite toys all of a sudden. And clearly, this 2024 draft class was highly touted. Omar Khan stacking another one on top of the 2023, which was also really, I thought it was very hasty to compare it to 1974. But nonetheless, what have you seen from the 2024 rookies? Anyone standing out in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, I guess, with the offensive line, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
use 3 of your first 5 picks on them. Troy Fatanu, Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, they all look the part. I mean, they're all massive human beings. The Steelers needed to continue to revamp their offensive line, and I think they have absolutely done that. Now, will there be plug and play week 1 starters? I don't know. That's up for debate, and I think that's going to be an ongoing mix and match through training camp and preseason. But they've certainly looked the part. Fatanu is very quick with his feet. Just watching him in individual drills, there's a speed factor there that is really, really impressive. And I mean, that's why he was a first round caliber talent, right? The big question with him will be, the Steelers look at him as a right tackle, but between the competition between Dan Moore and Broderick Jones for that left tackle spot, I think if Dan Moore Jr. wins that battle, Broderick's going to go back to right tackle and Troy Fatanu is going to be sitting on the bench and waiting for his turn. But I think we learned last year the Steelers aren't going to rush a guy into the starting lineup. I mean, Broderick Jones didn't see the starting lineup until, what was it, mid-season. So
Yeah.
I think Broderick was a little bit more raw of a player. Fatanu and Frazier have a lot more collegiate snaps under their belt. But that's something to certainly watch. And then you look at Zach Frazier. I think he has the best shot to be a plug-and-play week 1 starter. He obviously has to battle Nate Herbig for that spot. But, he's looked really good. And he's been picking Nate Herbig's brain. I just talked to him this past week too. And, he said that they know it's a battle. And, he obviously wants to win that. But, we're still really early into this thing. And he's been certainly leaning on the veterans for that. Then you go to the 3rd round guys, Wilson and Wilson, right?
Yeah.
Roman Wilson, he's looked good so far. With some of the other reporters that have been in the Steelers organization last couple of years, and when George Pickens came into the league, they said that you knew right away that George Pickens was going to be special, just kind of the plays he was making in practice. And for Roman, he's had some ups and downs, right? I mean that's why he was a 3rd round guy, but he's close. There's been so many plays that have been like so close, whether it's just just through the hands or some really good coverage. But I think he's a guy that we could be talking about in a month or two, just taking a really big step. What his role is going to be this year, I don't know. I think if you look at like a slot guy, I think that is like a Calvin Austin this year. I mean, George Pickens even said this past week that he's been working a little bit more in the slot too, but Roman Wilson will see the field to what extent, I don't know. But he's a guy that certainly caught the attention of some of the vets there. And then Peyton Wilson, he's just a fast, tall, langy linebacker. I think he's going to be a fan favorite. When I spoke to him this past Thursday, he said he's a blue-collar guy. He grew up on a farm, very Jack Lambert-esque, right? Like I spoke with you a little bit earlier about, I don't know what his exact role will be. I think he could be that dime linebacker, but that's Patrick Queen and Landon Roberts' room for now. And I mean, even when Cole Holcomb comes back, head coach Mike Tomlin said he expects him to be fully healthy or almost fully back by the start of training camp as well. So
And what about the sixth rounders? Anything you notice out of Logan Lee or Watts at all?
Yeah, I mean, so that defensive line room is very, very veteran led, and so Logan Lee's snaps so far hasn't gotten a ton of opportunities, right?
Right.
But I think he is a guy that the Steelers are, he's not a instant plug and play guy. I think he's a guy that the Steelers look to develop and mold. He's kind of positionless at Iowa, right? I mean, just his body frame, he's a little bit smaller, but I think a guy like Brett Kiesel is a good comparison. He wasn't an instant guy day one either, but you just find a role, and that Steelers defensive line is veteran led, but it is aging, and so the Steelers are looking to the future, and I think he could be a future piece there for sure.
All right. I want to finish this up by asking your opinion on a couple topics that are burning topics with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and just give me your own personal take. This doesn't have to be anything that's related to what you've seen or what you've heard in the locker room.
Yeah,
Obviously, you can answer this however you'd like. What's your take on Cam Hayward's contract situation?
I think it's going to get done. I think he wants to get it done. I think the Steelers want to get it done. I know the age is a big factor, but I think there's something to paying a guy of his leadership and expertise. And yeah, he's coming off an injury, but I mean, outside of last year, I mean, he's been one of the best defensive linemen in the league. He thinks he still can be that for another at least 2 or 3 years here. And I think a deal will eventually get done. Do I think it's going to happen tomorrow? No. um
Yeah.
but the Steelers love Cam. Cam loves the Steelers. I think he wants to finish his career here in Pittsburgh, and I think it'll happen.
Let's go back to 2021. If you had to pick one of the two players that would stay in Pittsburgh at the end of their contracts, their rookie deal, would it be Pat Fryermuth or Najee Harris?
Pat Fryermuth, for sure. I think the big question right now is whether the Steelers add a number two wide receiver right now, and I think if they don't, I think Pat Fryermuth can be that guy this year. He's dealt with some injuries too here as of late, but he's a really talented player, and I think he could have a really big year. Arthur Smith's offense is very tight end friendly. I've talked with Pat and Darnell Washington and Connor Hayward and Michael Pruitt, and they've all said that they expect their roles to be significant this year. I think the Steelers are going to run multiple tight end sets a lot because they want to run the football early and often. Then I think it's just natural you play action pass off the run game, and those tight ends will be involved. And so, yeah, I would say Pat Fryermuth, it would be more likely to get that contract extension than Najee Harris for sure.
I want to ask you about a trade. So, not a specific trade, but do you think the Steelers will make a trade prior to training camp? It doesn't necessarily have to be like wide receiver. That's what everyone thinks about. That's what everyone
Mhm.
points to, but it doesn't have to be that. Do you think Omar Khan will actually pull the trigger on a trade or no?
Prior to training camp, I would lean no.
Okay.
I think the Steelers feel really good about their room. Now, Omar Khan has tricked us before, right? I mean, he said he had full faith in Kenny Pickett, and he ended up getting traded to
Yeah.
Philly. And he said he had full faith in the internal options at center heading into the draft. And well, the Steelers used their second round pick on Zach Frazier. And so I think you have to take what Omar Khan says with a grain of salt at times. But I think at the same time, the Steelers feel really good about what they have. Do I think a trade will happen at some point? Yes.
Ooh.
Whether that's for a receiver or maybe, hey, Broderick Jones comes out here and makes a statement at left tackle, and Troy Fautanu looking good at right, and then Dan Moore becomes expendable, right? I think some Steelers fans are a little bit low on Dan Moore, but it's rare to find a guy with as many starting snaps as he's had in the early portions of his career. And I think maybe there's a one-for-one trade similar to we saw for Dante Jackson, Deontay Johnson, with maybe you trade Dan Moore and you get a mid-tier receiver. Maybe you look at like a Treylon Burks in Tennessee, right? He's kind of lost his spot in with the Titans since they've added Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd this offseason. But I think the Steelers want to see how things shake out in training camp. Like I said, this time of year, I mean, you try not to let your eyes fool you without the pads on. And once that finally comes on and you see what you actually have in your team, I think that's when moves are more likely to be made.
And that's a great point because Steeler fans should remind themselves that like Kevin Dotson, Kendrick Green, they were
Right.
traded in camp, and that's
Yes.
when they were deemed to be, well, they're expendable. I hate to say that, but in terms of the
Right.
football
Right.
field. All right, next question is, will we see Darnell Washington do anything other than block this year?
I think so. I think so. This past Thursday, he had a really, really nice day. He caught 2 touchdowns in 7 shots. Listen, I think the Steelers would be crazy to not use that frame, right? I mean, he's a
Right.
massive human being. Is he a great blocker? Yes, he's practically a 6 offensive lineman, and I think the Steelers will look to continue using him as such. But the Steelers are going to use him more in the pass game this year. Listen, that tight end room is going to be led by Pat Freiermuth, and Freiermuth is going to receive the majority of those looks among the tight ends. But Darnell Washington is certainly a guy I think his role will grow. I think specifically in the red zone, he's a guy that I think you just have to use his body frame and just see what he has. I mean, if he struggles a little bit in the pass game, it doesn't hurt to just still have him out there as a blocker. But I think the sample size is so small on him, right?
Yeah.
And through the beginning portions here, he's certainly been used in the pass game a lot more than what we saw last year.
All right, last question. Just your general thoughts. We know the schedule, the roster is pretty much settled unless there's a trade made at some point. What are your expectations for 2024 for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Yeah, I think maybe 10-7 wild card team isn't out of the
Okay.
question. I mean, listen, the AFC North is probably the toughest division in football, right? And
Yeah.
so that absolute gauntlet of a schedule, the final 2 months this season, we're going to find out what the Steelers are made of, right? I mean, you hope that they come out of the first half of the schedule with a solid winning record because I think that 2 month stretch is going to be pretty brutal. But listen, I mean, the Steelers have had a ton of success in the AFC North, right? I mean, they've won 7 of the last 8 against the Ravens. There's a lot of questions around the Bengals with Joe Burrow coming off injury. There's a lot of questions around the Browns with Deshaun Watson coming off injury. And I think last year the Steelers went, what was it, 5-1 in the division, and I
Yep.
think if they can have similar, 4-2, even 3-3 isn't awful in this division. I think it's not out of the question that this is a playoff team with a lot of the upgrades that they made around their roster. I mean, I think if you look past maybe the number 2 receiver, is there a hole on this roster? I don't know. I don't think so, right? And so there's a lot of questions at the quarterback spot, but I think if one of them can work out or even be better than what the Steelers had last year, and Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph and Mitchell Trubisky combining for 13 touchdowns and 9 interceptions, I think this is a playoff team. And I know the big question is if they can win in the playoffs that they haven't done since the 2016 season, but I think that is a possibility. They're built to be able to hang with some of the bigger dog teams and the Buffalo Bills and Kansas City Chiefs, and just controlling the football and the time of possession with their run attack. And, I think they expect this thing to be a top 5 defense in the league with a star-studded defense adding even more stars to it this offseason.
I've always said the roster has been built. Now they just have to go out and get the job done. They have
Right.
to go out and perform. And that's the challenge. And that's why you pay Mike Tomlin a lot of money and a 3-year extension to do so. But that's Aaron. I want to very thankful and gracious of your time you spent with me and getting us this Monday morning conversation. I want to give you the opportunity to plug anything that you want to, whether it's social media handles, websites, anything like that. You can go ahead and do that now.
Yeah, so you can find all my work at yardbarker.com right there. And then you
Yep.
can follow me on Twitter X at Aaron_M_Becker. I put out as much content as I possibly can when I'm in the building. I want, to connect with fans and make it feel like you're in the locker room and at practice with me. I post a bunch of stuff, so follow me and it'll be a fun season. I have a feeling.
Yeah, you do a great job. I appreciate all the work that you do, and I appreciate you taking the time, man. Have a good little bit of a break before training camp. I'm sure we'll be in touch. Take it easy.
I appreciate that. Thanks, you too.
Huh.